Welcome into the Nonprofit Exchange Leadership Tools and Strategies. Hope that you had a wonderful 4th of July and thankful that you are joining us here for today's program. So excited to have a good friend and an amazing academic researcher with us, Josh Hook. Josh is an assistant professor at the University of North Texas there in the School of Psychology. He is an amazing researcher in the subjects of forgiveness, humility, and religion and spirituality. So we're excited to have him in with us. But before we get too far in our program, want to quickly go through some housekeeping issues. As always, I'm Todd Greer, the host of the Nonprofit Exchange. Want to remind you about a couple things, including our June issue of our magazine, Nonprofit Performance Magazine. The June issue, we focused on giving for impact, and you can see the work there, including our cover feature, Adam Grant, business professor at the School of Business, the University of Pennsylvania. Want to remind you that you can always check out the magazine at Synervision, SYNERVISION leadership.org, and you just look for that magazine tab. As well, I want to invite you to join the community. If you've been looking around, you've been sniffing out what it looks like, this is an opportunity for social benefit leaders like you to be able to be in community with other leaders who get what they are going through. Whether you're talking about issues in developing your board of directors, asking questions about how you can best attract funds, thinking about how you can develop more leaders in your organization, or looking at engaging your members, this is an opportunity to ask questions, to participate in guided discussions, and to even sit in on mastermind sessions that will help you grow your leadership as you impact your organization. All right, all of that's there. Again, with us today, the amazing Josh Hook. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Todd.
Absolutely. So Josh, I touched a little bit on what you do and who you are. If you would go into just a little bit more of a framework for your role there at the University of North Texas, and maybe some pieces that you're currently doing research on.
Yeah, definitely. So like Todd said, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology here, and my background's in counseling psychology. So I was trained as a therapist, and I'm a licensed psychologist here in the state of Texas. And yeah, I do research and I write about mainly topics related to positive psychology, so things like humility, forgiveness, and religion and spirituality. And what we're going to be talking about today, I think, is mostly humility. And with that, a lot of my research focuses on what humility looks like in areas where it's difficult to practice. So things like marriage relationships, relationships where there might be cultural differences, and also relationships where there might be power differentials. So we see that a lot in organizations when we look at relationships between a leader and perhaps members of a team.
Yeah, Josh, that's really interesting, but I've got to ask, why humility? Why would anybody want to study humility?
That's a good question, and I think some people maybe balk at the notion that humility is a good thing, and I think we do struggle with incorporating humility into our personal lives, and I think a lot of the reason is that we like being right, and we have a tendency to think that we've got it down. We're right. We have a tendency to minimize our limitations, and that can really be a problem, both in our personal lives and in our broader social and relationships in our social communities. So I think it's important.
Yeah, and we talk about this sense of humility, and I think a lot of times the term gets thrown around. And folks, you have to understand, I'm going to be playing this role here, but humility is a key and core component for my own work. And actually, my dissertation focused on humility. So I'm gonna throw it out to the expert, though. Josh has actually published more extensively on the subject in a wider variety of places than I have. So Josh, you're gonna be my little voodoo doll. I'm gonna poke you here and let's see what happens. What is humility? I hear a lot of people toss that term around, and for a long time we didn't really talk about it, but it's coming back. Josh, what is humility?
Yeah, so I think some of the reason why I think humility hasn't been necessarily popular is people think of it as maybe just a deference or kind of taking a lowly position or thinking about yourself as maybe bad or lowly or something like that. But really, psychologists think of humility in, I think, a more positive way, and really use two main components when we think about humility. One is a more intrapersonal component, and that has to do with an accurate view of the self. Both an awareness of your limitations as well as an accurate awareness of your strengths. So not thinking of yourself too highly, but also not thinking of yourself too lowly. And then also, I believe there's an interpersonal or a social component to humility, and that involves being more other-oriented rather than just focused on yourself and what you need and want, but being focused on the other person who you might be in relationship with.
Yeah, so let's take these two components because I think they really start to lay something out for us. When we're talking about that intrapersonal, we're talking about what is our role as a leader and how does that begin to play out for us? Because I think a lot of times we're taught not so much by people, but by the standards that we see that leaders have to be in control and leaders have to think that they've got it all together, so to speak. How does humility then play the role if we're thinking about it from an intra-personal level?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's. I'm glad you said that because I think it's a common thing for leaders in organizations or in religious communities where we think we have to have it right. We have to have all the answers. We have to present this completely confident self, and a lot of times that's not accurate. So if we feel kind of our limitations or struggles coming on, we want to hide those and put those down and present just this front. It's almost like an act. Yeah. But I think what people don't realize is that really hurts our ability to connect with those individuals who we might have influence over. So I think even though it might be a little counterintuitive, I think it really helps if leaders can be more open with themselves and with others about their faults, about their struggles, about the areas in their lives where they might not have it all together. I think leaders might find that it helps them connect with the people who look to them for advice in a more real way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really intriguing pieces here is we started out talking intrapersonal, but obviously our intrapersonal orientation and how we kind of deal with things internally ultimately impacts that. You use the term other-oriented nature as the second component, but it impacts that relational perspective. And so leaders, it's what is inside and how do I kind of cope and understand all this. But then that certainly is going to take us outwardly. So Josh, if you would, you talked about one of the research areas that you've looked at is power differences. And certainly most anybody who's ever been in an organization has probably felt either on the high side or the low side here in a power differential. They've either been over somebody, if you think about the organizational chart, or under somebody. Yeah. How do we understand that humility piece in that type of an environment?
Yeah, so I think it's an environment in terms of a power differential that strains humility, because when you have a situation where you have a person who's in charge or leading someone else or leading a team, it's almost like their opinion or their point of view counts more. It has more power than the other people, and so it's easy sometimes for a leader to kind of go with what they think and just make that happen without being open or getting feedback from what other people think. So I think that's a situation where it might be even especially important for the leader to incorporate the feedback from others, be aware of their own limitations, be teachable, have a stance that appreciates the strengths of others in terms of the team members. Because it's easy, I think, for a leader, if they're not careful, to just kind of bulldoze over their team and push forward their agenda. And then this can cause some problems, both relationally with the members of the team, but also just in terms of performance. Mm-hmm. If you're only really working from one perspective, a lot of times you may not get feedback about perhaps the drawbacks of a particular point of view or a particular way that you want your company or organization to go that might be really important for you in terms of moving forward. So it reminds me of some of the old research on group think, where people are in a group and everyone's kind of thinking the same way, and especially when there was a strong leader who thought a particular way, it wasn't easy to get feedback from the group that counteracted his or her position. But it was really important to get that other feedback and those other voices, and I think it can really contribute to a better working team if that is able to happen.
Yeah, that's a really important point when we think about how we frame and how we structure things. Jim Collins is one of the ones who, in the business environment, who has really helped to bring humility into the positive light, as opposed to where it had been in the dredges for so long. And Collins kind of coined the term the level 5 leaders. He talked about what a level 5 leader is. One of the core components was the idea of humility. And what is it about that? You talked about from the relational level, and you talked about the negative here in the groupthink piece. If you could kind of paint the picture for what you see as that leader exemplifying humility then, and what kinds of core things might they do, Josh?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned Collins in his book Good to Great. He talks about that level 5 leader, and really it was kind of an interesting finding, or perhaps a counterintuitive finding at the time, that the leaders of these highly successful companies, they exhibited a great drive and intensity in terms of pushing forward their company, and so that was expected, right? So we expect CEOs to be very driven, to be very high achieving. But then he also found that was coupled with humility in these leaders. And so part of our thinking around why he found that was that when you have a very driven, intense, high-achieving leader, sometimes that can cause some wear and tear on the relationships among the people who are in the organization. And so we call it something called social oil. So we wonder if humility actually can kind of be an oil to help with that wear and tear that comes with a high-achieving or intense leader. But yeah, really, when I think of a leader who's exhibiting humility, I think of someone who is aware of their limitations, someone who is open to feedback from others, someone who encourages feedback, both positive and negative, from the people who they work with. Also someone who really goes out of their way to appreciate the strengths and talents of the people in the organization, who looks to those people and really tries to encourage them in what they're doing. Also someone who's teachable, someone who's willing to incorporate feedback from others into their own lives, both the positive and the negative. So those are some of the attributes that I think that really, at least research has shown, kind of comes with this humble leader.
And that's such an interesting thing, because again, if we step back for just a moment and kind of go into history, we see it was really with the humanist philosopher that the idea of humility really started to go down, and Nietzsche and others really looked at humility as less the virtue that it had been thought of, and more as a vice, in the sense of something that cripples or inhibits people from being able to succeed. And yet here we are, we're coming back around in the social psychology and social science and organizational behavior literature, and we're starting to see these changes. And I think it's important for us to understand there's a difference between the concept of meekness, maybe, that we sometimes think of, or I'm gonna lay back, I'm gonna hide that, and being humble. One of the pieces too, that intrapersonal piece that Josh was referring to, is you kind of know where you stand, and so you don't have to focus on yourself at all times. And I think that allows us to be, again, more other-oriented, Josh, as you put it, for us to be able to look at that. You think about a leader, whether you're in a capacity as an executive director, a board member, if you're a church pastor, or a leader in a number of other facets in an organization, if you are able to move the focus from self to others, what that does to your teams, to your members, to your congregants, to whatever that organizational membership might look like, you start to see that transition of change there. So we're kind of laying out the what, in the sense that people can understand that there are some really positive benefits
Hmm.
to engaging humility. But Josh, I think one of the questions always that will follow is, once I know that it's important, how do I go about doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. It's easy to know what it is, but harder to maybe implement it in your life. So a couple just thoughts. One is I think there's almost like a paradigm shift that has to occur where people need to be more okay with having both sides of themselves presented, both the
Mhm.
strengths and the weaknesses. And I think I mentioned this a little bit before, but I think a lot of times our tendency is to hide the parts of ourselves that maybe we're not proud of, or our faults or our failings. Whereas I really think that it's almost more powerful to present both and be vulnerable about our true selves, both the positives and the negatives. When I think of speakers or authors that I connect with the most, it's the ones that share themselves vulnerably, both their positives and their negatives, because that's my experience, that's my life. I struggle, I have difficulties and problems, and I think that's our reality. So I think part of it is being more okay with presenting that. Um, I think also in terms of understanding and being okay with your strengths, weaknesses, and limitations, sometimes we don't necessarily know that about ourselves.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to get feedback and honest feedback from others. I remember I attended this personal growth weekend once, and part of the homework getting ready for the weekend was I had to ask 3 family members or friends closest to me to tell me the things that they appreciated about me the most, and also to tell me the things that they struggled with in relationship with me. And that was really eye-opening. Some of those things I wasn't really aware of, just because we don't really do that in our everyday lives, ask for honest feedback about our faults. Mostly, I think, because we're scared to see what people might say. But if we really are committed to that, I think that those kinds of things are what we need to be doing on a regular basis. Also, in more of an organizational or social thing, I think we need to set norms and standards that it's just a common thing that we incorporate feedback from others, irrespective of whether they're in charge or at any part of the hierarchy in our organization. That we have norms that it's okay to say opinions, it's okay to give feedback, it's okay to disagree, it's okay to point out limitations in a point of view or a particular direction that we're going as a company or organization, and also to actively ask for that. I think sometimes we're so focused in a direction, or maybe we've worked out that this is really the right way before we've asked for feedback and asked for the opposite opinion or an alternate point of view. So I think to really incorporate that into the structure of an organization, that's normal. This is something we value and we want, rather than trying to shut that maybe minority voice down.
It's a great point, and I love these 3 here, so I'm going to repeat them back, folks. If you're like me, and I try to take notes anytime I have the opportunity to be with one of these experts. Josh presented kind of the idea of, if we're seeking to engage and become more humility focused in our own living and our own lifestyle, we need to think about vulnerability and a willingness to display both our strengths and weaknesses. He talked about the importance of getting feedback, with that idea of maybe seeking 3 people that are close to you, that see you in a number of environments, and seek both the strengths as well as the things that you struggle with. And then from the organizational perspective, the importance of that norms, standards, and values, as you seek to make it known that it is okay to speak honestly. As well, it's a norm for feedback to be provided, or that almost that devil's advocate piece, I think, that we oftentimes struggle with. So this is a really important piece here for us, and this is why we dig into these things. Obviously, we can talk about a number of different things, but until we start engaging them, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge. In the past, I've had on the program here Josh's mentor, Everett Worthington, and I've also had Mark Fernandez, who is the CLO, the Chief Leadership Officer at Luck Companies. Ev talks about forgiveness, and you can kind of see as we went through that program with Ev the importance of setting the value of forgiveness in place. When we talked with Mark, it was the importance of setting and making sure that we become values-based organizations, and that means moving things from our values are on the wall to our values are in practice. So we start thinking about this, and Josh, how do you go about, we say we set the norms and standards, how do you go about really setting and making them concrete, do you see, in organizations or in any kind of relationship?
Yeah, so you're right. It's difficult to make a norm or to have something be incorporated in an organization, especially if the culture isn't necessarily that way to begin. But I think really, one thought that came to mind is leaders have a lot of power in setting norms for their particular organization. A phrase that I use a lot is, speed of the leader, speed of the team. So I think as leaders, we set the tone. So, for example, if we want to make this a norm, I think we start doing it ourselves. We start in our relationships asking for feedback. If we're in a meeting, we say, okay, this seems like the direction that a lot of people are thinking is the right way, but what are we missing here? What's the opposite? Are there any drawbacks that we're not seeing? Sometimes even having people think and write about both sides of the situation on their own before coming into the group and discussing, that can sometimes help. Trying to think about, who hasn't been talking as much in this meeting, and trying to seek out their feedback explicitly. Like, what do you think about this? It sounds like wondering if you have any thoughts or any counterpoints to this. So I think, doing it yourself hopefully will try to maybe filter out throughout the organization. It came to mind some research by a friend of mine named Brad Owens, who's a psychologist and teaches ethics out at Brigham Young University, and he has done some research on something that he calls humility contagion. And it's this idea that if the leader is more humble, that creates or can lead to a more humble organization. And so he's done some research on this that actually supports this idea that more humble leaders led to their teams actually expressing more collective humility as a group, which in turn led to better team performance and other positive outcomes. So I think there's a lot of power in the place of the leader to incorporate this as a norm into one's organization.
Yeah, and one of the things I love the speed of the leader, speed of the team, leaders go first, those kinds of mantras. One of the things I always talk about when we're talking about values is we value what we celebrate. So if humility or any other value is important in your organization, you've got to celebrate it. So when somebody else shows humility, we celebrate it. And now with humility, we may not think like, oh, hey, let's go give them a ribbon for being humble. People always joke about that idea. But we can celebrate when humility is exemplified, when it's shown, whether we're within a team, by other leaders in our organization. I think that's something that's a really important piece. And again, you also value what you measure. So if we're measuring those things, if things like humility become part of our ongoing performance evaluations, if they become part of our culture fit pieces when we're hiring, those are ways that we really begin to allow humility to really come into the organization. So I think this is a really key piece, Josh, you're hitting on for us and bringing to light. And of course, Bradley Owens is a fantastic researcher, probably in our generation, one of the ones that's going the furthest with humility here in a recent level from the organizational perspective. And I know Josh and Don Davis and a handful of others have done a lot with the sense of cultural humility. And you guys have done work on a number of other areas. So this is a really important piece for us. Now let's kind of step a little bit into you. Josh, you're at the University of North Texas. What else can we do if we want to learn a little bit more about you, if we want to see more from you or hear more from you? How do we engage with you?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of ways. One is I have a website and blog that I blog regularly about issues related to psychology and personal growth, religion and spirituality. So that's one place. And my website is www.joshuanhook.com. So that's one way. You can also follow me on Twitter at Josh Hook. So those are a couple ways to interface with me just on a regular basis. And obviously, if anyone wants some articles or things like that and some of my research, you can find that by emailing me or looking that up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will find a bevy of research. Josh may look really young, but the man is a prolific researcher and comes from a fantastic research team. So really excited, folks, to see as things happen. Josh is one of those faces you're going to end up seeing a whole lot more of because of the work that he's doing and the impact that it has on society. The work that they've done in relationships is phenomenal, and I think that there's a lot more that's going to continue to happen. So make sure you get in there, you subscribe to check out Josh's work and his blog. Find him on Twitter, as he mentioned, and really take a look. If you are a researcher or you're somebody that enjoys engaging in a little bit deeper of reading besides just kind of the popular press books, you'll find a lot of insight gathered from reading through some of Josh's research. So, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. This is deeply important, and you've done a great job kind of helping us understand what humility is, why we need to live it, and how do we actually make this happen in our everyday lives, especially in our organization. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insight, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting about you on humility.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, reminder, our June issue focus, Giving for Impact. You can check out the magazine. Just a quick insight, September's issue is all about how do we embrace our whole community. So we'll have more on that issue as we get closer in time. But want to say thank you again for joining us. I'm Todd Greer, Executive Director of Center Vision Leadership Foundation and host of the Nonprofit Exchange. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.